After the call to Islam became public, Prophet Muhammad and his followers endured 13 years of torture and persecution, simply because they were inviting the idol-worshipping tribes in Arabia to worship God alone. The perseverance and passive resistance displayed by the Muslims showed a great level of self-control and inner strength.
It was not only the weak companions and slaves who were subject to attacks at the hands of the Meccans. Also, companions of Prophet Muhammad from upper classes were not spared from one form of persecution or another, like Abu Bakr, who nearly died when he was beaten badly one day. It is worthy mentioning that the very first martyr in Islam was not a man at all, but a woman, Lady Sumayya, who was jabbed with a spear by Abu Jahl, one of the leaders of Quraysh, which proves that even women were not spared from persecution and killing.
To really appreciate the suffering and sacrifice of the early Muslims, one would just really need to look at some of the historical narrations about what happened in Mecca during those days. We talk about an embargo. We're not only talking about an economic embargo, we're talking about an embargo that affected family relations, social relations, friends, relatives, affected the economic situation of the Muslims, affected their religious freedoms and political freedoms. It was an embargo that encompassed the entire community. And we look back at some of the reports, we find people saying that they ate grass. Some of the Muslims, like Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he actually ate grass to survive. He had no food. We read the reports about children who were crying and screaming who had no food, and Muslims would go to their brothers' markets, fellow non-Muslims, and be refused to be sold food, even though the food was right there in front of them. So this was not only an economic embargo, but also a spiritual embargo, a social embargo, and most importantly, a mental embargo, which was designed to shake the Muslim community from their faith.
To avoid getting captured by the Meccans, most Muslims had to immigrate secretly under the cover of the night, leaving behind all what they had of properties and memories. In Medina, 14 years after the beginning of the Prophet's mission, a revelation came from God permitting the Muslims to fight back.
Permission was not given to them for more than 14 years, despite all of the killing of victims and the suffering they endured, because their hearts were not yet ready to perform jihad.
The Quran gave permission to the Muslims to engage in combat with their persecutors for the first time. The Quran says, permission to fight back is given to those who are being fought because they have been wronged, and indeed, God is all able to give them victory.
This verse is clear in defining combative jihad. This combative jihad is in response to aggression and oppression and seeks to establish justice, which is a supreme goal, not only in Islamic teachings, but in every civilization. Establishing justice is a supreme goal. If you lose your homeland, well, Islam is encouraging Muslims to fight back and regain their freedom.
A lot of discussions and a lot of differences over why Muslims fight, what justifies a Muslim to carry arms against others. As a convert to Islam, definitely that was a question that I had. And in recent years, due to the events that we've seen all over the world and the tragedies and killing of the innocents, I really had to do some soul searching. I was blessed to come and study in Al-Azhar University here in Egypt. And my 4th year of studies here, we actually studied an entire course on jihad. And in that book, it clearly states that the reason why Muslims fight is not because they're fighting people who don't believe in Islam, but that Muslims can fight even Muslims if there is a situation where injustice is being perpetrated against them. So the main reason for fighting in Islam, according to that text which was written by a number of scholars, as well as the majority of classical Muslim jurists, is to repel injustice.
Muslim scholars throughout history explain the rulings of combative jihad depending on the two primary sources of Islamic legislation, the Quran and the Sunnah.
The teachings of Prophet Muhammad mainly focused on two things. When it is allowed to go for combat, and if you go for combat, the do's and don'ts in combat.
According to the Quran, especially in chapter 22, in verses 39 to 40, One ground for jihad is to protect places of worship, such as monasteries, synagogues, churches, and mosques.
The Quran says, "For had God not decreed to repel some people by means of others, demolition would certainly have come to many monasteries, churches, synagogues, and mosques, in which the name of God is much mentioned in praise."
Another reason for jihad is failure to establish justice through peaceful means.
Combative jihad is allowed only if the establishment or restoration of justice through peaceful means has failed.
The Quran says, "Yet if they incline to peace, then you should also incline to it."
This is one of the main rulings in Islam, that Muslims cannot perform combative jihad if their enemy wants peace. And of course, peace doesn't mean just ceasefire. Peace means ceasefire, we are returning back your rights. So that was crystal clear in the Quran and in the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that Muslims should try to establish justice through all possible peaceful means. And if this happens, then Allah is opening no way for them to fight.
The Quran says, "Therefore, if they withdraw from you and fight not against you and offer you peace, then Allah accords you no lawful way to fight against them."
Peace always comes as the first option in Islam. One of the chapters of the Quran is called Al-Fath in Arabic, which means the manifest victory. And it starts like that. Surely we have granted you a manifest victory. And guess what? This victory was not in any battle. This victory was a peace treaty called Al-Hudaybiyah Peace Treaty. So what do you think about a book that calls a peace treaty a manifest victory? Is this book promoting peace or war?
Amongst the Prophet's teachings was the direction not to crave conflict. He said, "O people, do not look forward to meeting your enemies in battle and ask Allah to spare you from war. But if you meet them in battle, then stand firm." The right of a people to resist occupation by a foreign army is proving to be a powerful catalyst for many contrasting arguments in today's world.
One main reason for combative jihad, specifically called qital, meaning fighting, is legitimate self-defense to stop aggression. Another reason for jihad is to resist occupation.
One of the worst crimes that can occur to an oppressed people is the stealing and the taking of their land and property. Nearly in every ideology, the right of the oppressed people to stand up for their rights and fight the occupier is recognized.
Islam encourages Muslims to resist occupation, which is in fact considered to be a form of enslavement. This is clearly unacceptable and humiliating for the occupied people. Resisting occupation is considered a duty and an essential human right in many cultures. Emiliano Zapata, a leading figure in the Mexican Revolution, said, "It is better to die on your feet than live on your knees."
One of the groups of mujahideen were the founding fathers of the United States of America, who stood up against oppression, who resisted tyranny, but no one charges them with terrorism. The same can also be said about the French, who were great mujahideen in the face of Hitler and the Nazis.
Among the founding fathers of the United States of America, and one of the most prominent figures in the American Revolution, is Patrick Henry. He said, "Give me liberty or give me death."
No one can blame the founding fathers of the United States of America in fighting and resisting for the sake of freedom. Also, no one can blame the French for resisting and fighting the Nazis. It's common sense.
I think people have the right to resist occupation in a violent way under some circumstances. I think those circumstances held in the case of the American Revolution and created what became the United States. I think that the circumstances are where the foreign government, the foreign occupier, are abusing the population, and where there's a fairly broad consensus among the local population and the leaders of the local population that that is in fact occurring. The United States was founded on a revolution. It was a right of the people to overthrow an abusive government. This was something that was enshrined in our Declaration of Independence. This is what the Declaration is all about.
In occupied territories, it is plain there are going to be a community of individuals who are going to resist the occupation. Whether you talk about occupation during the Second World War or occupation in more recent times, there are going to be circumstances in which a great number of people are going to consider that some form of resistance is lawful and legitimate and justified. The question is, what are the limits in law on what you can do? And it comes back again to these very simple principles that I keep saying. It may well be permissible to target through force, through violence, military objectives, but what you can't ever do is expose civilian populations to the threat or to the use of force. Once you do that, even in a situation of occupation or unlawful domination, you are crossing a line, just as a state crosses a line when it ever uses violent weaponry against civilian targets.
To serve their hidden agenda, some people wrongly present verses of the Quran in order to deceive those who don't have sufficient knowledge of Islam.
Take, for example, some people say, how come Muslims are having in their book fight in the cause of Allah? They should have love in the cause of Allah like other religions. But again, the same immoral cut and paste game is played against Muslims. The verse actually says, fight in the cause of Allah those who fight against you. But they don't continue the verse and they take the words out of context, playing this game always against us.
The Quran says, and fight in the cause of God those who fight against you, but begin not hostilities. Indeed, God does not love those who commit aggression.
A major problem within the Muslim community as well as outside of it is what I call drive-through jurists or cut and paste jurists. Those people, whether they're Muslims or not, who take, splice up verses, edit them, add a little TiVo, or maybe even give it a little, a cut and paste job here and there, and present verses and statements of the Prophet, peace be upon him, either which are not complete or out of context, using those verses and using those statements of the Prophet to justify egregious actions.
Some people say, how come Muslims are having in their book, kill them wherever you find them? As if the Quran is only encouraging Muslims to kill non-Muslims. As if Muslims should walk with 2 machine guns to kill non-Muslims wherever they find them. But they are playing the same immoral cut and paste game. If you read the verse as a whole, it says, kill them wherever you find them and drive them out from where they drove you out. This verse is telling Muslims to fight their occupiers and regain back the freedom of their homeland. One of the clearest proofs that combative jihad is only to establish justice is that it is allowed for Muslims to launch jihad against Muslims too, if they are the transgressing party. And this is not my own opinion, this is the very words of the Quran. It's very clear in the Quran that if Muslims are oppressors, they can be fought against. So it doesn't matter who's Muslim and who's not, but what matters is who's an oppressor and who's oppressed.
And if two groups of the believers fight amongst themselves, then reconcile between them both. But if one of them rebels against the other, then fight you all against the one that which rebels until it complies with the command of Allah. And if it complies, then make reconciliation between them justly.
A powerful verse which illustrates the profound sense of justice in Islam. And it clearly expresses that Muslims are not ordered to fight people of other faiths simply because they share a different faith than Muslims. But it illustrates that Muslims are ordered to fight against oppression wherever it comes from and evil. What's interesting historically when you look at the early Muslim conquests, as people like to call them, I mean, even in prayer, when we start our prayer, that's called a conquest. So Muslims are not looking at the conquest in the sense of only a military victory. But when they entered those countries, people greeted them and welcomed them. They did not rise up against them. In fact, some of them even sent letters to the Muslim leader saying, come invade the country, we'll help you and help us to relieve this yoke of oppression from our necks. So it's very rare to find that there was a wide resistance against the occupying armies of the Muslims.
During the 7th and the 8th century, when Muslims fought against the Roman Byzantines and the Persians, they were rarely faced by any civil resistance. In fact, many civilians joined the Muslim armies and fought against the Romans and the Persians themselves.
John, the Bishop of Nikiu, an Egyptian Coptic historian, was an eyewitness to the Muslim army's conquest of Egypt. He wrote in his chronicles that the Egyptian Aryans joined the Muslims in besieging the Roman soldiers in the Babylon fortress.